article that you wrote 30 years ago, as of today, how to timestamp a digital document was influential, or monumentally influential, should I say, in the development of blockchain. And indeed, you were cited multiple times in the original blockchain white paper. I'm just going to cut to the chase because that's what everyone is colloquially thinking. Are you Satoshi?
Well, I get that question a lot.
I know.
And part of it is just that, I'd worked in this space for quite some time and then sort of drifted away from it to pursue other endeavors. And then I started getting unsolicited mail, postal mail as well as email, saying people had read the Bitcoin white paper and saw that Stuart and I were the most cited. They also Googled me and saw that I did speak Japanese, that I had lived in Japan before. And so they were just asking me to put two and two together. And I guess my answer is always the same when someone asks that. I try to state it as clearly as I can. Namely, 私は Satoshi Nakamoto ではありません。でも Satoshi だったらそれを告白すると思いますか? I don't know how to say it any more clearly than that.
Okay, for those of us who don't speak Japanese watching this show, what did you just say, Scott?
I said, well, I'm certainly not Satoshi Nakamoto, but if I was, do you think I'd confess it?
Certainly there might be financial advantages to that, but I respect your integrity to your cause. Now, your cause is to, we'll talk about many of your works right now in your current projects, but I want to talk about your paper that you wrote 30 years ago entitled How to Timestamp a Digital Document. Give us a summary of the importance of timestamping digital tokens and coins and what that means and how that translates to blockchain technology.
Sure. So the title is a little bit of a misnomer. What we were really concerned about was, given the fact that the world was moving to all digital records, there's a need to guarantee the integrity of those records in a way that everyone can trust and believe in the records. Because up until that time, the reason that people would trust records was because of evidence of tampering being obvious if you were to alter the record. And so we needed to elevate the issues so that we could make the digital data itself inherently trustworthy. And the solution to that was what led to the linked chain of blocks whose evidence is widely distributed so that you create a kind of decentralized trust network. And that really was, from my perspective, the breakthrough idea that underlies not only Bitcoin, but Ethereum and all of the other world's blockchains. Obviously, the difficulty with that is that people have added so much additional value on top of our original set of papers and the original service that we began to operate, that blockchain has come to mean something larger than just that. And so we certainly aren't trying to take any credit for the wonderful innovations that have been built on top of our original work, and are just delighted to be part of a very rapidly growing space.
Mm-hmm. Now, back then, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the timestamping mechanism you were writing about didn't refer to a chain, right?
Actually, that's not correct. It was a chain from the get-go.
It was, okay.
Although there are two interlocking mechanisms that are proposed in the original paper. Okay. One, the sequence of linked records, but the other one aimed at efficiency, because we have substantial scaling issues that occur with that simple interpretation. And so the other way of creating randomized witnesses that were under no one's control is something, in fact, that you see sort of rediscovered in the Algorand layer 1 protocol, as well as other systems that have kind of come back to that idea.
When you wrote the paper at the time, was there enough or sufficient computing power to create something that we now know as cryptocurrencies today?
There certainly was adequate compute power in individual settings. What's so different today, though, is that you can have any individual have the necessary compute power the necessary bandwidth, the necessary amounts of storage that are required. Whereas back then, it would have just been a few concentrated enterprise partners that would be capable of that.
Well, given that I've stated you are not Satoshi, the person or entity or organization that is Satoshi wrote the white paper and referenced your work several times in relation to timestamping and created what we now know as Bitcoin. In its purest form, Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer cashless system. When you first read that paper, what was your initial impression of this concept? And how did you feel being referenced?
Well, we were glad to be referenced because they were clearly using that foundational work. We were glad that it was useful for the creator. We often say that no one seems to know who Satoshi is, but we respond by saying, but he certainly knows who we are. And I think my response was that it was a kind of brilliant piece of sort of work of art, okay? But I felt that all along that the proof of work use of incentives was certainly incentives on steroids, but it wasn't clear to me that over the long term it would remain the most adopted solution. The original work that we proposed, if you read through the series of papers, not just the original paper, really relies on a kind of proof of reputation and the fact that different players have disparate motives, disparate incentives, and so the difficulty of trying to align everyone's incentives in a conspiratorial way was demonstrably, all but impossible.
Why was it necessary, you thought, and you and your coworkers at the time felt, that cashless systems of money had to be based on immutable code?
Well, again, I want to clarify again that my hat goes off to Satoshi. But in a sense, these are not cash systems. They are, in a sense, the opposite. And when you talk about 19 of the 20, so much of that is a circling the wagons kind of thing. Namely, gee, is CBDCs going to be big? Well, we certainly don't want to be left behind, so we'll start an experimental project. More to the point, I think, and this again goes to Money++, this is fundamentally about information exchange and more information becoming public and transparent. Okay, and so I have a very contrarian view when it comes to the understanding about what the so-called privacy problem is. I think we need to be advocates of our data, certainly controlling our data, but to imagine that we want to prevent people from getting access to our data is in fact the absolute wrong way to view the privacy liberty debate.
Not to discredit what you're just saying, but as a foundational father of distributed ledger technology, one could argue that you've seen this happen from 10 miles away. I mean, everything is posted on the ledger, right?
Right.
I mean, it's not just central bank digital currencies. Any sort of cashless system based on the ledger could be transparent for all to see.
That's right. And I think what is lacking is the grasp that this can become the great enabler of individual liberty rather than something that restricts it.
I see.
Let me give you one example.
Okay.
We typically view the privacy problem as Google or Facebook knows so much more about us and we're powerless to sort of counter its effects.
Yeah, they do. Facebook knows what I want to buy before I want to buy it.
Right. And therefore that's an intrusion on our liberty.
Okay.
But I'll give you a different example that I think puts it on a clearer playing field for the future.
Okay.
So I'm guessing that just about everybody that listens to this is familiar with Airbnb.
Sure.
Airbnb system. And my wife and I first started using Airbnb. We liked it the first couple of times. Let's say the third or the fourth time we wanted to use Airbnb. We read the reviews of a particular place. We decided that was the perfect place for us to go on vacation. And so we put in our request for these nights at this place. And an hour later, okay, we got a note from the purveyor saying, we reject your application. Why? Because you've only used Airbnb 3 times up until now. You don't have enough of a reputation for us to trust you. And so for the first time, I realized that this privacy issue is a two-way street. If we want to play in the marketplace as individuals, we have to disclose information about us. And I think if you look at the Airbnb as a kind of canonical case, you'll see that the real goal should be, how do I present the truth about me in as appropriate a way as possible so that I can gain more influence and more ability to interact with the rest of the world. We shouldn't always view it as a kind of bunker mentality that the more people know about me, the more vectors they have to spam me or get at me. That's fundamentally not the real problem. It's an asymmetry of information that's the problem. And so to me, what we're trying to do with blockchain, and what is very much achievable, is to drive that individual narrative that projecting more information about us can give us increased power and influence.
Right. Governments have claimed on their brochures, at least on the internet, that central bank digital currencies, being digital currencies based on the blockchain, will be more efficient. We talked about the problems of inefficiency of our system. They've cited improvements on efficiency as one of the main reasons of doing this. Improvements in facilitating cross-border payments and transactions in business is one of the main reasons of doing this. Do you agree with that first, and then we'll talk about the privacy issue?
Sure, it's a step forward, but it's going to have to compete in the marketplace to anticipate your privacy concern. The genie's out of the bottle. And just as when I was growing up, as a young student, one of the presents many parents would give aspiring students would be a little chemistry kit so they could perform all these little experiments at home with, making different reactions. The blockchain is like a money kit. Okay, I would call it Fed in a box, and the fact that there's an explosion of being able to explore what a currency is and how to use it to facilitate exchange means that the existing nation states, and again, I'm no anarchist. I'm happy to confess being libertarian, but the existing nation states and their own fiat currencies, pushed out as CBDCs, are going to have to compete on their merits with other alternative currencies. And so to anticipate that privacy question, if people don't like the mix of options that they have from a CBDC, they will be able, in essence, over time, to vote with their feet and choose to make use of a different currency mechanism that is more to their liking. The idea that the existing leading players of nation-state fiat currencies have a monopoly on the system, and simply by adopting blockchain-style solutions for their existing currencies means that all of the non-nation-state actors will be boxed out. That's just a myth. That's just a pipe dream. It's way too late in the game for it to go back to being a closed system.
Perhaps they're doing it for themselves too. Central banks have swap lines that they swap currencies with each other, and this might help them, with their commerce.
Absolutely will, but again, not within a closed system anymore.
There's a lot of, and I just want you to address this before we move on. There's a lot of fear of government's malicious intents with blockchain technology, such that you've addressed a privacy concern, but it extends beyond that. If, let's say, you have a low social credit score in China, for example, the governments can not only track or monitor your behavior, but they can alter your behavior by limiting access to capital if you have a low social score. And with the advent of CBDCs, that provides a direct avenue for them to do that.
I completely agree with what you've stated, and I'm sure that there are people that are listening to this discussion saying, how could somebody that was clever enough to invent the blockchain be so stupid about the fact that, like the digital yuan, allows people social influence, allows people's social standing to be used as a discriminator. And I think the answer for people that care is that you have to understand